top 5 builds in TU22. Some of you might notice this is a bit of a long one for a build video. However, I'm going to be doing this in a slightly different way. I'm basically going to try and give a bunch of options along with the build. And I'm going to be specifying the build as to what generally makes it. So, as an example, and up first, now, Pestilence has been making waves since the start of TU22, and for very good reason. It received a massive buff to its RPM, which has made it a lot more viable in copious amounts of builds, whether you want it as your primary slap weapon, or if it's just something as a bit of backup. And for like the first time ever, due to this massive increase in RPM, it's genuinely very, very viable on strikers, which is probably the area where this weapon is mostly going to shine. However, one of the key things with Pestilence now, especially with the introduction of the new Regnbue set, I say newer, I suppose, is that we're actually able to get a very, very healthy balance between our bullet damage, our DPS, as well as our ticks, which are nowhere near as important as a lot of people seem to think. Still, a few good builds to start with Pestilence, and probably the only real area at the moment where high ends actually have like a decent foothold outside of raids. Now we're going to start off with the best in slot Pestilence high-end build, 3-piece Regnbue, Contractors, Foxes, Coyote's Mask. Remember to roll your Pestilence to crit chance. This is the best in slot attribute. For Coyote's Mask, we can swap this out for Cheska if we don't like the variability of it. This will give us more crit chance as well as if we want a little bit more survivability, because the talent we'll be running on this will be Glass Cannon. I've just not put it on the screen. We can swap this out for Palisade. It's a slight damage drop, but it's another 10% armor on kill. There is also the perfect Glass Cannon variant, which is easier to farm for, still requires unicorns, but it's like 0.5% more in bullet damage, but we lose 3% in our tick. And again, we can do the mask swap arounds with Cheska as well as Palisade. We also have some safety variants if you don't want to go down this route. It's a bit less damage, but for solo, they'll be fine. Basically, 3-piece Regnbue, Contractors, Palisade, Catharsis, or 3-piece Regnbue, Sawyers, Contractors, and Palisade. Both will offer you 2 blues. One has higher tick, but more sustainable damage through the bullets, which will be the Catharsis build. One has just... Honestly, I don't recommend the Sawyer's Knees build, simply because Sawyer's Knees are very, very inconsistent. And even if built properly at the high end, without Sawyer's Knees, you lose like 5% total DPS. And with the buff, you gain like 1% over the first build that was shown. They're just not worth it. I do plan on doing a video showing this, but overall, on Pestilence, Sawyer's Knees are just no longer worth it. Sorry. Heartbreaker! Who remembers when this thing was broken? And I mean broken. Right, Heartbreaker is actually performing really, really well at the top end. It still feels sluggish and a bit dull to build up if you don't want to rely on the ACS stacking, which I personally don't. I don't like running a weapon purely just as a stack stick. So that's like a me thing, but still some people might really like it. I do know that Heartbreaker is a favorite among the hardcore crowd, but even more prominent is just how some of the weapons have changed around, with Heartbreaker essentially getting another 10% amplified damage, which is actually pretty damn huge. Now, the standard go-to build for Heartbreaker is as follows. We have Coyote's Mask, Cheska Backpack with Vigilance, 4-piece Heartbreaker. I'm going to be swapping around the backpack talent because it's kind of unclear what's working best at the moment. But we can also go for a Cheska Mask with Memento to give us a little bit more survivability. And I actually find this to be, for me personally, the best one to run. However, we do have some other options, like adding in a Palisade backpack for a 10% armor on kill because we have to run Technician. Or we can go down the route of potentially 2-piece Spellstone. Add in some blues, 10% armor on kill, 1% armor regen. This actually really does help out Heartbreaker in its survivability lackings. However, if you want to get a little bit crazy for shorter engagement, we can do the Closer with Cheska Backpack, or Fenris with Spotter, or even potentially something like Gruppo with Spotter. All three of those tend to end up pretty evenly. However, if you want to go really crazy, go Cheska Gruppo, Backpack and Chest with Bloodsucker and Intimidate, and smack on a Chameleon. This is the highest potential Heartbreaker build. It's just a nightmare to micromanage Chameleon, Heartbreaker, Intimidate, and Bloodsucker. It's a ball ache. I do plan on doing a video with this build at some point. However, every time I record it, just everything goes wrong. So yeah, look out for that one. Heartbreaker's potential really lies in its versatility and just how much you're able to really like customize it depending on what you want. Now, I said earlier that it struggles with survivability, and people are going to go, oh, but it gives you a bunch of bonus armor. Yeah, it does, but it's also a nightmare to stack outside of using ACS 12. A lot of the ARs that pair with it quite well are lower in the RPM, which means you can't actually gain stacks quick enough to counteract any form of incoming damage. And once you hit max stacks, unless you actively take off a piece or sit there in cover to drop your stacks, you have no way to regain that bonus armor anyway. So once you hit max stacks, if an enemy chunks you and takes away all of your bonus armor, you're back to square one. And due to the fact that a lot of people would put quite a bit of blues in this, you have no choice but to take all of that damage because you can't kill them quick enough. Headhunter, or specifically sniper builds. Now, annoyingly, there's not a lot of variability in these. There's a few bits and bobs, and it is mostly going to be dependent on whether or not you agree with the use of Determined or not. I'm going to do my best to add in Determined, because I don't agree with it. Now, Headhunter builds are theoretically the most powerful builds in the game, simply because of what you can add to them to make them kind of nuts, but that's like a very specific area of build, which we'll get to at the number 1 spot. Shock horror. That being said, with specifically looking at MMR or sniper builds, I'm actually not too clued in as to what the best snipers are at the moment. I've always just been kind of partial to Mantis because apparently I suck at being a sniper in this game. So I need that nice, big, handy marker to highlight where the enemy's head actually is. So I mostly just use Mantis. However, for the overall build, so we're rocking 3-piece hot shit, the Gift, Chain Killer, and then Fox's Prayer. You might notice that I've got 2 minor attributes missing. Honestly, I've seen people do some weird stuff from like armor regen, repair skills, etc., etc. To mix it up a bit, we can swap Chain Killer for Habsburg and Headhunter. The main one that I see people using solo is Habsburg Providence, and the backpack has Bloodsucker, just for more survivability. And if you like using Determined, it's the same thing, apart from we do 4-piece hotshot without the chest and backpack, and just whack on an MMR with Determined. That's realistically about as varied as it gets, sadly. Now, I say that, although I have seen people that like to use Memento. Once you start stacking with Headhunter, and if you're a good shot or using Determined, it's very hard to like not kill things, to be perfectly honest. So having Memento for the skill tier, the armor regen, the armor core, once that's been built up, is very nice. I've seen some people that like to use Sawyer's knees because they're pretty stationary when they're sniping, which is a good idea. I just find it irritating. But yeah, that's like realistically it. There's not really a lot that goes into MMR builds, I'm afraid to say. Strikers! We've all seen a striker build by now, right? Cool. Moving on. So grab your favourite rapid fire weapon, SMG, LMG, AR, whack it on this build. I've left the mod slots empty, so all you got to do is try and get yourself to just over 50% crit chance. Not just under, try and go for about 51, 52, 53, 54 realistically, and that is going to be like your standard striker build. Same again, but with striker's chest. Typically this is used for like legendary as well as the incursions. Probably the highest DPS setup in the game. Striker's safety, utilising 2-piece Bellstone. Use what talent you want. I suggest Obliterate for a little bit of extra oomph. But this will give you 10% armor on kill, 1% armor regen. 2 blue cores help you survive. With a striker's build, I don't suggest going over 2 blue. Simply just because at that point, you're kind of taking too much away from the overall DPS. If you need more survivability, I would actively suggest 1, running gun original specialization for 10% armor on kill, and 2, for the talent on your weapon, because strikers does so much damage anyway, whack on preservation. This means it's 20% armor on kill if running gunner, but if you get a headshot, it's 30%. And if you're running something along the lines of Bellstone, 2-piece Bellstone or 1-piece Palisade, which you could also use, you're getting 30% armor on kill or 40% on headshot. Which looks something along the lines of this. This is literally 30% armor on kill, 40 on headshot. You don't need blues, and in terms of like DPS, you're like, other than utilizing chest strikers, you're only really dropping like 7-8% in total DPS versus like the next best thing. So it is a drop, but strikers just does so much anyway. Who saw this one coming? I mean, since when has Regulus, since it came out, not been the best fucking thing ever? So yeah, Regulus builds. Now, there are a few ways in which we're able to mix and match these, but generally speaking, there's just 2 builds. High-end Headhunter and my favourite, Headhunter's Fury. So the high-end build, Punch Drunk, The Gift, Chain Killer, Contractors, Foxes, and Dodge City Holster. Feel free to play around with Memento if you really want, if you want a tankier shield, but realistically at that point, the only real thing you can go for to replace the holster would be Habsburg. It's a little bit less damage, more survivability. You lose the ability to swap to Dodge City when needed and just be like that one particular guy and all of his friends around him within a 5-meter radius. Bye-bye. But yeah, it's entirely up to you. Some people like swapping out Contractor's Gloves for a Palisade piece for another 10% armor on kill if that's the way you want to go. Some people are quite happy, like me, just to stick with Gunner. Others like to use Sharpshooter because you get like a little bit more weapon handling or something, or it just pairs well with the other weapons that you can put on the build. And then Headhunter's Fury, 4-piece Hunter's Fury, everything rolled headshot, Chain Killer, Gift, Regulus, obviously. You can swap Backpack to Memento. Feel free to swap around pieces like DNH, Habsburg. It's all going to depend on whether you want to focus on pistol more, shotgun more, rifle more. I would suggest sticking with pistol and shotgun as that seems to be the go-to. The overall difference between these 2 builds is Headhunter's Fury is technically a lot more powerful without the use of Dodge City Holster on the high-end build. The difference is, though, mostly Headhunter's Fury is very, very limited by range. If you're not able to stay within Hunter's Fury range, it starts to very, very quickly fall off, which is what you can see happening on screen now, which is why I'm doing it this way to show this is the bad side of the Hunter's Fury side, and that is quite simply range. You need to be within 15 meters, whereas the high-end build, obviously it's still going to be limited by the pistol optimal range, but nowhere near as much as the Hunter's Fury setup. So hopefully we can pretty much see that in terms of like overall changes to what like the meta is, the only change is the high-end Pestilence build, realistically. Everything else, the same. Rifles don't do enough. OD still doesn't do enough. High-end Pestilence is actually beating it. Yeah. Have fun, good luck, don't die. It's bad for the health.